Here's another part of the notes for Activity 5. Remember what our goals are. First, you should be able to explain the difference between sexual and asexual reproduction, something that we already talked about. Using the example of corn, you should be able to explain how organisms can be changed with selective breeding. So for example, how corn was changed from teosinte, from what we know it, to what we know it today as corn. You should be able to explain the difference between these terms, allele, gene, genotype, and phenotype, and that's going to be a main focus of these notes right now. Finally, you should be able to make Punnett squares, and you should be able to make Punnett squares from information about the parents or the information about offspring, and then use that Punnett square to predict the genotypes and phenotypes of the parents or offspring, depending on which information you're given. Let's jump right in and get started with this. Now in our activity, we're going to be looking at corn, and we're going to be looking at corn that has yellow kernels or purple kernels. Now remember that each kernel represents a fertilized corn, so it's kind of like a corn baby. So let's look at this example. If a corn plant that makes purple kernels is crossed with a corn plant that makes yellow kernels, they would reproduce sexually by taking the pollen from one corn plant and putting it on the silks of another corn plant. And what would actually result is that all the kernels of all the corns that result from that would be purple. So how does this happen? How do you get only all purple? Where did the yellow go? To look at that, we've got to kind of sort some things out, especially some terms. So let's do that. The first term I want to talk about is this term called alleles. And alleles is a fancy word that just means different versions of a gene. In this case, our gene is for the trait of kernel color. And our different alleles would represent the purple allele and the yellow allele. So, kernel color is determined by these alleles. Now, each plant is going to have two alleles. One comes from the mom and one comes from the dad. Together, those two alleles make up the genotype of the plant. Now, here's another rule that we have to keep in mind. Dominant alleles will mask recessive alleles, or make those recessive alleles kind of hide or be unseen. So let's apply this to the corn. In corn, is the purple allele or the yellow allele the dominant one? And how can you tell? In corn, the purple allele is dominant to yellow. And how we can tell is that when we bred together the purple corn and the yellow corn, what it made was purple corn. So the purple allele hides the yellow allele. Now to help write this in shorthand or as kind of an abbreviation, you'd write the alleles as letters, and you'd write the dominant alleles as capital letters, and the recessive alleles as lowercase letters. So what we'd see here is that big A would be this purple plant. This yellow plant would be little a, and this purple offspring, it wouldn't be big A. It's actually going to be big A, little a, where one of the purple alleles masks the yellow allele. Now, if this is confusing, let's take a closer look at how this happens. Let's do a quick definition recap. So, an allele is a version of a gene that's going to be represented with a letter. A capital letter for the dominant allele, or a lowercase letter for the recessive allele. A genotype is a combination of two alleles, because every organism is going to have two. Now here's some new terms. Homozygous dominant is when there are two of the big A's. So homozygous means two of the same allele. Dominant means that they're both big A. Heterozygous means one of each, so big A, little a. And homozygous recessive is with little a, little a. So again, homozygous means two of the same, and the recessive means that both of those are little a, little a. Now here's a new term, phenotype. So genotype is your combination of alleles or your combination of letters, but phenotype is actually what you see, the observed trait. In this case, the phenotype for corn can be purple or yellow. So the phenotype for this one is purple. When you cross that with a yellow phenotype corn, the resulting offspring have a purple phenotype. Now remember, what we're trying to do is to explain why a purple corn and a yellow corn give a purple corn, but not only that, but why the offspring have a different genotype as both of the parents, but the same phenotype. So to help explain this, we're going to use a tool called a Punnett Square. And that just helps us organize and predict breedings. So let's imagine that we have a corn whose genotype is little a, little a. So that means it's homozygous recessive, and it's crossing with another corn who's homozygous dominant, or big A, big A. Now, the color of the corn on the left isn't accurate, but I couldn't find a purple corn costume. Let's put that aside and make this Punnett Square. So step one of making a Punnett Square is to separate the mom's alleles along the top, and these alleles are going to represent the eggs that she can make. So let's put her along the top. So we've separated her genotype of big A, into the two boxes. Our next step is that we're going to separate the dad's alleles from his genotype along the side. And these are going to represent the sperm that the dad can make. So we separate his homozygous recessive into those two boxes. The next step is going to be to combine the sperm and egg and make some babies. So this egg could be fertilized by this sperm to make big A, little a. This egg can be fertilized by this sperm to make big A, little a, and so on. So let's fill that whole thing in. And then what you end up having are little baby corns. So the value of this Punnett Square is that you can use the Punnett Square to predict the genotypes of all of the babies. So in this case, we would predict that all of the babies would be heterozygous. Heterozygous, 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 heterozygous. And those are the genotypes. The phenotypes of this cross, all of these, since they have one big A, would be purple, because that big A, purple, is dominant to yellow, little a, the recessive allele. So, if we think about this and apply this back to the corn example that we saw, this mama corn would represent the purple corn, big A, big A. And this daddy corn would represent the yellow corn, little a, little a. When they cross, all of their corn babies are big A, little a, or heterozygous, and that means that they're all purple. Now there are lots of different crosses that are possible, and you can use Punnett Squares to predict them all. So let's fill out the rest of the Punnett Squares that are in your notes. So here are all of the different possibilities, and I'm going to do just one. Just for giggles, I'll pick the one at the right. Let's say this is the mom and this is the dad. Now remember, step one is to take the mom's alleles and put them along the top. So big A, little a, these represent her eggs. Take the dad's alleles and put them along the side. Little a, little a. Do the crosses. Big A, little a, little a, little a, big A, little a, and little a, little a. And then you can make the prediction. So we'd have two heterozygous offspring and two homozygous recessive. Those are the genotypes. The phenotypes, we'd have 50%, or 2 of the 4, would be purple. and 2 of the 4 would be yellow. Let's see if you can fill the rest of those in your notes. So you can pause now and do that. And then there's just one last instruction when you're done. When you're done, what I want you to do is to find a partner, because now what we filled in on that sheet might have changed. So for bell work, you filled in what do you think about these questions. Now I want to see if maybe things have changed. So with a group, with a partner, what I want you to do is to compare your ideas, or think about how your ideas changed, and fill in this second column. Then we'll regroup as a class and talk about this some more.